I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I want you to get up right now. Get up, go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Things have got to change.
How many stations does this go out?
You've got to get mad.
67.
Say,
I know it goes to Louisville and Atlanta.
I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure out what to do about the depression and the inflation and the oil crisis. But first, get up out of your chairs, open the window, stick your head out and yell, and say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Who are you talking to, Herb?
CGG, Atlanta.
Are they yelling in Atlanta, Herb?
Are they yelling in Atlanta, Ted?
But first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
They're yelling in Baton Rouge.
Get up, get up, get up out of your...
Son of a bitch! We struck the mother lode!
Stick your head out of the window, open it, and stick your head out and keep yelling and yell, I'm as mad as hell, I'm not going to take this anymore. Just get up from your chairs right now. Go to the window.
Where are you going? I want to see if anybody's yelling.
Window, open it and stick your head out and yell and keep yelling. I'm mad as hell! I'm not going to take this anymore!
I'm mad as hell! I'm not going to take it anymore! I'm mad as hell! I'm not going to take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell! I'm not going to take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to
take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell! I'm mad as hell! I'm mad as hell! I'm not going to take this anymore! I'm mad as hell!
Okay. Buongiorno here after a little bit of a time lag. Mad as hell and not willing to take it anymore. I'm ready to go to the window and start yelling. Very well-known film by by Sidney Lumet, starring Peter Finch, Faye Dunaway. Won a lot of Oscars in 1977. Great film if you've never seen it. I actually showed it one time in a class called American Masterworks. Really interesting to see how that film continues to be such a great allegory about the nature of mass media, the nature of American society, and whatnot, which will be our major soup du jour tonight, which really should be this afternoon. Tonight we're going to talk about the Society of the Spectacle, the book, The Society of the Spectacle. The book was written in 1967, a year before I was born. So it's old. It's an old thing, right? But for those of you who have embarked into it, and for those of you who have read the essay, the recent essay, the illustrated guide to the Society of the Spectacle, which is a little more manageable and a little more digestible and easier to read, and it's got cartoons in it, maybe you should be starting to kind of pick up on some of it. Although Debord, once again, we're back in the Marxist camp. Debord was a Marxist. He was writing in France at a very, very revolutionary time, really across the entire world. And what we have to take away from Society of the Spectacle is the ways in which it kind of updates Marx's thought. You know, Marx is writing in the 1850s, 1860s. Here Debord comes along and wants to expound upon Marx. So in order for us to really get into Debord the way that I want to and unpack him, we've got to go back and we've got to talk about some of Marx's ideas and some basic ideas about economic history and capitalism and all that. So we're going to dig into that with both heels today. And this was the cover taken from a very famous film. Everybody's got 3D goggles on. But first to the bullet points. I need to let you know, and you guys have got to prepare, that we are going to do our first collaborate session. Buongiorno's finally breaking down and getting into the neoliberal abyss of Blackboard, all right? And doing collaborate, and we're going to be doing a collaborate chat with Douglas Lane. Douglas Lane, who is the publisher of Zero Books, a progressive leftist book publishing company that's put out a lot of really well-known people. On top of that, Doug's got a podcast called Zero Squared, which I started listening to a couple years back, and it's really good. I gave you guys the link to check it out. It's very much a podcast of a certain intellectual level, but he touches on a lot of things about pop culture, everything that's going on in politics, and Doug is like just a really, really bright guy, and we're going to talk to him about spectacle. We're going to talk to him about Debord, and we're going to talk to him about the ways in which Debord is applicable, perhaps even to the spectacle that we are seeing right now, in terms of the presentation of catastrophe, the spectacle which is COVID-19, and how that this might be a case of the chickens coming home to roost, so to speak. So we're gonna all be back together again on that, and finally getting my chops in on collaborate and getting back into this matrix-like maze. Today we had this matrix maze of Zoom meetings that I feel are devilish and alienating and weird, but it's one way that people hook up with each other, you know. And we had a departmental meeting this afternoon via Zoom. It went well. It went overly long. I got some housework done while it was going on. Shh, don't tell anybody. I'll be sending out a reminder after, like Sunday, Monday of next weekend. Like, this is when we're coming on. And you should have, after the conversation, definite brownie points, definitely extra credit points for people who've got good questions for Doug, all right? Gave you guys some background information on Doug, what he's about. He's got so much stuff online, you can find out what he's about ahead of time if you want. Other bullet point, as luck would have it, Bongiorno being the sadistic taskmaster that he is, with my leather high heels and my cat o' nine tails, has scheduled the due date for the rough draft of the midterm essay on the same day. I'm going to have a Blackboard link for that. And hopefully it will work. You never know with Blackboard, and the bottlenecking and, all the technological disruptions that are going on. But I'm going to put up a link. I'm going to put up a thread for you to upload your papers there. And if that's not working, we'll just go via email. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get right to work like a busy little beaver and just like knock them out, scan them, and get them back to you so that you can do a final draft, all right? So that's the way that will work, all right? I want to, and we were talking about it today in the faculty meeting, about availability, about stressing the fact that in lieu of office hours, I gave you guys my phone number. You can call me anytime before like 9 o'clock, unless it's some kind of crisis call. If you've just had enough of this and you've got cabin fever and you're out on the ledge of the building, then you can call Mr. B at like 9:15 if you need to. But I would suggest calling somebody with a little more therapeutic savvy than me, because I just have a tendency to give people the red pill, right? So, I am accessible. If you want to talk about, I'm having problems with the paper, I don't know where to go, I don't understand this, or, I'm just having problems in general, because, I hear through back channels about students taking the classes that are having problems, and I'm always hearing about them like secondhand. It's like, I'm not some tyrant, I'm not some ogre. You can like call me up, we'll talk about stuff. In fact, we'll talk about whatever you want, so I want to make sure that door is open so no one's like freaking out, At the same time, I want to stress the idea that, putting these videos together I'm doing it as a service to you guys, and it takes a lot of time and effort to put these things together, and I've gotten kind of theatrical with some of them, and I really got to stress that, in lieu of the fact that I'm not, twisting your arm to get on Collaborate. You got to be there at this certain time, the fact that I'm not doing that and giving you the luxury and the liberty of watching these things whenever you want. I really hope you're watching them and, taking in what, the information, as part of the class and thinking about things, because I think that we're in a time right now, at this particular juncture in the American experiment, where we should be thinking a lot more and dumbing down a lot less and zoning out a lot less, So it's like, I don't want you guys to stress over the midterm, It's a rough draft, you know. It's like if you give me, it's like if it's 4 pages, if it's 3.5 at this point, and we've got to flesh it out, then we'll do that, all right? And then once we like knock that out of the park, you know, we'll talk about like some type of final project. And given all the attendant circumstances around that, I'm gonna go easy with it, you know, and I'm gonna, you know, be very, very liberal about what's gonna constitute a final project, all right? But get on the blog and make some comments, you know. Take a look at the stuff. Take a look at the material. I think that some of the things that we are talking about and engaging in this particular class are important and connect to a lot of the things that are going on right now. So that's going. So those two things on the bullet point. On the bullet points, I wanted to talk really quick my picks and Nick's picks. In the other class, we're reading a book about I teach a class on mass media research methods, and we're reading a guy by the name of Arthur Berger, his textbook on quantitative and qualitative research methods. And we're going to actually Skype with him, too, the author of our textbook, in that other class on May 30th, I believe. Not May 30th, April 30th. April 30th. One of the chapters he says some things in one of the early chapters on rhetorical analysis about gangster rap, and that I find kind of controversial. And I want to do a blog post on how I feel about the effects of gangster rap and where it came out of. And in order to do that, I've been doing my homework, you know, not a dummy in the black experience, the historical experience of blacks in this country, but just wanting to kind of brush up on certain aspects of the civil rights movement and the revolutionary movements that were going on about race in this country. So I happened to watch these back to back. I watched 2 different documentaries that I would highly recommend, you know, whether you're a person of color or not. You know, it's like you should know about these things. The one was about the great black activist Malcolm X, called Speak It Plain. It was a PBS documentary about him, about his life. There was also a film about him, a biopic done by Spike Lee, starring Denzel Washington. That's definitely worth checking out too, to find out some things about Malcolm and what he stood for. All right, great documentary, definitely worth checking out. You can see it on YouTube. The other one I just watched was on a movement that occurred around that time period, a little bit after Malcolm. You know, Malcolm was killed in the early 60s, but this group of black revolutionaries called the Black Panthers. And this is a recent documentary called The Black Panthers, The Revolutionary Vanguard. And it is an eye-opener for those of you. It's a history lesson, is what it is. And it talks a lot about this movement. And I just want to go back and do my homework and do this. I want to do a blog post about, we'll talk about it, all right? But I'm working on it. I'm working on a kind of essay piece that will have videos on it. But check these 2 things out, all right? Going to start this lecture, all right, on tying it to Debord's work, because Debord is going to talk a lot about Marxism and capitalism and use some terms that we need to define. He'll throw around some terms that Mr. B is going to give you the Cliff Notes to. All right? Consider this the Cliff Notes to Society of the Spectacle. But first, some backstory, some back history about the place of Marxism in this country and why up until just recently and probably still most of the economic, and Richard Wolff will talk about this, the famous economist who taught at Mass Amherst, how Marx, in terms of his global stature as an economic analyst, was second to none, and how he became a dirty word in this country, and Marxism became a dirty word in this country to the degree that I literally know people, boomers, older people, who, when I was doing interviews for my documentary Juggernaut, I spoke to at least one high school teacher from back in the 60s, who I won't name, great guy, brilliant guy, and was fired during the late 60s, early 70s, I believe, from Vestal High School for wanting to teach students a little bit about Marxism. And he wasn't the only person that got blacklisted, and he's not the only. Hundreds of thousands of people in this country between the late 50s and the late 60s lost their livelihoods and became persona non grata in everything from like the Hollywood industry to journalism due to accusations of being a Marxist. And we're going to talk about why Marxism scared the ruling class so much in this country, that they needed to literally wipe it out of departments. And I'm going to do this lecture tonight in honor of all those people, in honor of all those people who were fired for saying what I'm going to say tonight. All right, so buckle your seatbelts, brothers and sisters, as we get into this. Here I got Karl Marx. He was German. He wasn't even an academic. He wasn't a professor. He wasn't, some highfalutin academic in some academic department. He was kind of working on his own as an economist. And he was primarily an analyst of economy. A lot of things get said about Marx that are not true, all right? Mostly by people that have never even bothered to read him or even read the wiki entry on him. All right. First of all, Marx was German, and he was influenced by German philosophy, and he came up at a time when, during the Industrial Revolution and after the Industrial Revolution, where him and a British guy by the name of Friedrich Engels got together and wanted to do an analysis of what was going on and the inequities of what they were already seeing in the 1860s with this process, with this form of economics, and trying to pick it apart, all right? And it wasn't like, and he wasn't a fan. He wasn't a fan, but he wasn't one of the only ones that wasn't a fan, and this is like the history that gets wiped out of the American history books right around the time of the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. All right, and we'll talk about why that happened. We'll talk about here's a kind of caricature, a political cartoon, kind of, pointing to the Red Menace, that was taking over the world and was going to endanger our way of life. What is Bonjour doing? First, I want to talk about the history of economy as such, the history of economics, right? From the very, very beginnings of how we crazy humans, unlike any other species in the animal kingdom, have this propensity for taking stuff out of nature, and no one else really does this. I mean, you can make a case that the wasp builds a nest, It's like, but we're very, very ingenious at taking things out of nature, natural resources, and converting them into all sorts of different things, either useful, primarily in the beginning, things to keep us from dying, as we were evolving, things like, places, when people started moving into regions that was really cold, we started making clothing, we started building lean-tos or shanties. And another thing was, the whole process of procuring things to eat so that we weren't going to starve. And those of you who have taken any kind of anthropology or archaeology courses will get a little bit of a primer on this development from kind of this like Paleolithic period of say 2 to 300,000 years ago to like the Paleolithic period, then the Upper Neolithic period, and we were basically hunter-gatherers, and then we start becoming not lazy, but we decide we want to stay in. Our brains are developing, we come up with agriculture, which, involves thinking about time and when you plant stuff. And that ties into something I want to talk about in a lecture when I'm not as mad about things that are going on right now in the agricultural industry in this country due to the pandemic, all right? And it's stuff that is ugly, and it is stuff that will make you very, very mad about how food is being thrown away right now when people are going hungry. But that's another story. So from very, very early on, the very first economies, if we can even call them economies, were subsistence economies. Basically, a group, the family, or a tribe, or individuals would pretty much do everything they needed to procure the necessities of life. It's like we would do it individually, and we would do we would do it all. We'd build our own houses, and we'd grow, and we'd procure our own food, and we'd do the things to allow one's family to survive. And it was kind of like a do it all yourself kind of environment, and that went on for most of human history. Most of human history, everybody kind of did their own thing by themselves in terms of food, shelter, clothing. You kind of did it all. And even like the early pioneers in this country kind of operated on that level, all right? Something very peculiar happens very early on, right? People have a lot of different theories about how it happened, why it happened, but at a certain point, we start to do what is called a specialization of labor. What's the specialization of labor? People started to realize that it made a lot more sense to, for instance, have one guy we were getting into more kind of sophisticated social arrangements where this became possible, where one guy in the tribe or the village would be the baker of the bread. One guy would be the maker of the shoes. This woman would be the weaver of the blankets. Another guy would build ladders. That the specialization starts to come about. And it makes a lot of sense. It's like if you're doing one thing, you get exceedingly good at it. And the quality of your product goes up, instead of, so there's this specialization of labor that goes on. But now there's a problem. A problem ensues in the specialization of labor due to the fact that it's like if I'm the guy that's making the ladders, and that's all I'm doing, and you're the guy that's growing the apples, I got all the ladders in the world, but I'm going to starve unless I can get some apples. And you are going to miss most of your crop unless you get my ladder. So a problem ensues that will pretty much haunt economics up until today. And it has to do with distribution. How are the things that how are the things that we're making going to be distributed in a way in which everybody kind of gets what they need, what they need to survive after the specialization of labor. And they'll do it in a lot of different ways. And they'll do this for thousands of years, all right? Capitalism and market economies are a relatively new creature, folks. For most of human history, it was done along certain ways. One of the ways it was done was through harvest festivals. Harvest festivals where everybody would bring their collected things to the festival, and then usually what would happen is the elders, the elders of the tribe or the elders of the village would be in charge of allocating the goods, and making sure everybody got enough of what they needed, to survive the winter or just to get through. And they would have these harvest festivals. Hence things like, Thanksgiving. Hence things like Halloween. All of these kind of secular holidays that we celebrate are a holdover from those kind of festivals. Those festivals of distributing things, right? Usually done with the decision of the elders. These were societies that still had like some respect for people with gray hair. As opposed to the total denigrate. It's like these young guys now. This whole anti-boomer thing, which is probably true. It's like I say. There used to be this expression in the 60s, never trust anybody over 30, and they were probably right. But the elders used to do it. Then something changes. Something very peculiar happens at a certain point, and this concept of the market comes into play. The market, which is a different situation than the situation of distribution that had preceded it for thousands of years. The market itself, the idea of a market, the idea of everybody kind of bringing their stuff to the village square or the village green, and the process of bartering, all right, for stuff is not something that we did for a very, very long period of time. It's about 400 years old. Although there were proto versions of the market in ancient Greece too, and we know, people nowadays, have academics and people that want to celebrate capitalism always have this all these ideas of the ancient Greeks. They were so brilliant, and they've kind of been passed on to the market. The fact of the matter is that two of our leading historical, ancient intellectuals, both Plato and Aristotle, had written specifically about this new phenomena called the market. They hated it. They hated markets. They wrote vehemently against markets, where people would go and because what happens to markets, all right? Here's the thing. Here's the thing they hated about markets. Why did they hate markets? They said they were antisocial. They said they brought out the worst aspects of the society. Because within the market, what would happen would be that people would bargain and haggle and try to get one over on each other, and it would cause resentment and this kind of dealing and trafficking and I'm not going to give you 3 dozen eggs. It's like you can only get 2. They didn't like it because they felt that it dragged people down. It dragged people down and caused a lot of antisocial behavior. The idea of the market system was always contested. The idea of a market was always contested. They weren't the only ones that didn't like markets. All right? People throughout history have always been critics of the free market. All right? It's not something that just started with Marx even. You know, he had to rest on the shoulders of other people. But alongside of this market economy, there were always alternative forms of distribution and production for all over the world, and for and every epoch and every age, there were different ways of doing things, different forms of organization. One of those ways was by means of a community, by community efforts. All right, and we still see that, and it hasn't. We still see that today. All right, people doing things collectively. Right? For instance, let's say that a village, you know, like building a house or building a barn, or maybe a bridge had to be built across a river, you know, or a pier had to be built, or all this like infrastructural things at this kind of smaller village level. And those things take a lot of time, you know. So people would get together and collectively and reasonably have a calendar, you know, in which like next weekend it's like we're all getting together to work on, you know, Bocephus's barn. We're all going to get together and we're going to build his barn. And then the week after that we're going to build Mary's house, because we're all going to get together and we all have these different skills and we're going to collectively work for each other, you know, in a collective, communal, and God forbid me, communistic kind of way, you know, where everybody put in their share of the labor, all right? And it was an equitable arrangement. You know, every once in a while, like somebody didn't want to do the work, or I'm sure people got lazy, and they usually, you know, there would be a nasty gossip about, you know, Mordecai, who was like a little too hung up on like, you know, plum wine to like get it together to come down a Saturday afternoon and build it. But irregardless, it's like it's a system that works, you know. That was one way of doing things collectively. There was another way of doing things that was pretty popular too throughout history, a way of getting labor done, and it was called slavery. It was called slavery. And what was different about slavery, the difference between slavery and the collective system was that in the collective system, everybody kind of took their shit, kind of carried their bit of the load. You know, everybody kind of worked collectively, you know, for the common good. You know, in slavery, we have a different situation. The first bullet point about slavery is that slavery is a system in which people, human beings, a lot of them, become property of a master. People are bought and sold in order to do the work. All right? They do the work. The master, on the other hand, doesn't have to do the work. Why? Because he's got slaves to do the work. All right? Slavery happens through all the different civilizations. You know, I mean, Greece had slaves, the Romans had slaves. You've seen these movies, Spartacus and Gladiator, and all. It's just, slaves have been around for. It's been this deplorable practice throughout history. You know, and we have a propensity to think that slaves were always black. For the American experience, they were, but slaves came in every shape and color. All right, there wasn't a specific color endemic to slavery. All right, so immediately we understand what kind of negativity gets generated by this whole setup. All right. And it's not, and in some places this is still a thing, you know. And it didn't end in this country until a very, very short period of time, you know, a very short period of time ago. You know, only about 170 years. You know, but what happens with slavery? What are the negative emotions that come with slavery? Conflict, tension, anger, resentment, you know, slave revolts all over the place. Watch the film Spartacus. Slaves, it's like, it was just basically one of those things. Like, it's like, you know, and the master would, for all intents and purposes, do whatever he wanted with the slave. You know, and the slave would do all his stuff for himself and then have to do all the master stuff too. So this is the way that labor got distributed. The next system that comes about is, one could say, maybe an advancement over slavery, but it's a system that comes out, starts in about 500 AD in Europe and goes on for about 1,000 years, up to about 1500. This system was called feudalism, all right? Feudalism is a different way of allocating labor and getting work done, all right? But here, the setup with feudalism was this, right? Most of the people that came up during the period of feudalism are serfs. Serfs are basically another term for the peasants, the people without means, the people that are living, the people that kind of come up hereditarily on a parcel of land and work that parcel of land and grow stuff for themselves, and they build their house and all that. And you know, in feudalism, you pretty much know if you're born a serf, 99.9 times out of 100, you're probably going to stay a serf for as long as feudalism lasts, and your kids are going to be serfs. On the other hand, if you were born within the, if you have the luck of being born a noble, you know, you operate along a different way. Here's the setup of feudalism, and most of you got this in social studies in high school if you didn't get anything else. During a regular 7-day calendar week, a serf would spend 3 days working his own parcel of land, his own, and then another 3 days he would spend working on the Lord's manor or the Lord's castle. And there's all these famous castles and chateaus in France and Germany and England that are testaments to the noblemen, all right, who got to build these huge, you know, grand structures due to the fact that they had a lot of serfs that would come over half the week and work for them, right? Sunday was the day for rest. Sunday was the day in the church, and this was all kind of kept, you know, stabilized by the church and Christianity, that on the seventh day, you know, you rested up, you know, and you went down to the church, and, you know, the pastor or the priest, you know, kind of convinced you that, you know, it's like, you know, all this toil you were doing now, you know, it's like it was God's will in some way or another. This level of inequity was, you know, they would kind of be the matrix of their time and convince people that it was a equitable situation. Finally, serfs and feudalism gets overthrown in the 1500s, the 1600s. Finally, the serfs are like we've had enough, and we're mad as hell. And all these peasant uprisings starts up, one of them being the French Revolution. The French Revolution of 1789, where the serfs and the peasants went to the noble gentry, including Marie Antoinette, and promptly cut her head off, right? To make a point that they had kind of had it, you know, with this situation. So that's feudalism. And feudalism, you know, I mean, this country, in a sense, you know, breaks from monarchy, breaks from that kind of situation. You know, it's like, because, you know, for a very long period of time, we were still under the lash of a king, King George. Capitalism is a relatively new animal. It's only been around for about 300 or 400 years. It starts in Britain. And it's an advancement in a lot of ways over slavery and feudalism because it allows for more individual freedom and mobility. It gives people more of a choice of what they're going to do with their lives. It's not as much of a caste system as feudalism was, or the total abomination that slavery was. Right now, people are free. They're free to go and get a job and work for wages, and pick what they want to do with their lives. It's like this whole phenomena of, for instance, going through school and hitting the age of maturity, at 18, 19 years old, and then, being, stuck with this dilemma of what you're going to do with your life and what you're going to take, you take it very, very seriously. People, go to their guidance counselor, they go and, they want to find out, what is right for them and all that. This is a relatively new phenomena, folks. This is a relatively new phenomena of having that kind of freedom in order to pursue, a career or a job and one way or another. So people in capitalism, you look for a job, right? And you're hired by bosses for the most part. Most people in capitalism in this country and abroad, most people work for somebody else, all right? Work for somebody else, all right? And you work for wages. You trade in your hours of time. You go, and you go on a job interview. You go and you make a decision, and you do this risk-benefit analysis of what is going to be the good thing for you, or what's going to fetch the highest salary. So you get into this, you become this, or one of the things you definitely not do is become a media studies where you don't do that. All right, you go and your guidance counselor says this is what's going to be needed in the market, and you go and you go and gain all these skills for employment. We'll talk about the fact that you've got to pay through the ass to acquire these skills at another time. We'll talk about that whole tuition thing shortly, but so you work for a salary. This is something new in capitalism. All right, so you go and have a job interview, and then you go and for a period of time during the work, during 5 days a week, you go in and you punch in at a place, and you spend 8 hours of your day using your muscles and your mind to, either work in retail or build widgets or put up, houses or deal in data collection or whatever you're doing, right? That you're making something, you're providing some kind of service, or for a long time was in this country is about manufacturing stuff, right? So you do all this work, all right, and then you go home. And you leave the product of your labor there, all right? You don't take it home with you. If you try to take it home, the thing that you worked all day on, if you try to take it home with you, there will be some guys in blue, the boss will call, and there'll be some guys in blue that will come to your house and hurt you for going, and it's called, in the grocery markets, it's called shrinkage. You don't go taking things from work. You leave your work there. You leave the product of your labor there. Marx will have a term for this, all right? And he'll call it alienated labor, all right? But what happens in this situation is this. This is the math. Let's do the math, all right? The employer makes an investment in what is called the inputs, or all the things that he needs, whether it be, if you got a restaurant, you got to buy sinks and a pizza oven, and you got a distributor, and you got to buy all these things to make the stuff, or if you're making cars, you got to buy all the assembly lines. You got to have capital to put up to build this means of production, all right, which the employer owns, all right, and then he hires people with the right kinds of skills to come in and convert this raw material into a car or into a toothbrush or whatever it is, all right, and he'll pay you, you know, whatever the going rate is, whatever that $10 an hour, or $20 an hour, or $30 an hour. But there's a very, very peculiar process that goes on in this whole thing, all right? You get paid $20 an hour, all right? And let's say you make like one broom, you're making brooms. Let's say you make one broom an hour, all right? And he's paying you $20 an hour, all right? When it goes to him selling the broom, it's like he will put a price on it and needs to put a price on it far more than $20 an hour, because for far more than $20, because if he just sold it for the amount of money he paid you, not the company would go under. What he sells it for and what he extracts out of this whole interaction is what is called the surplus. All right? The surplus labor value. The surplus, which he gets to keep. He's paid you off. He's got the product that you made, and he can do with it what he sees fit. What does he do with that surplus? Well, I mean, you know, you can't just go and, you know, be on a yacht all day long, sipping Chateaubriand with a bunch of, you know, bikini babes or whatever. He needs to put some of that money back into the business for all the inputs, for all the material, the nails and whatever that get worn back down. And then, you know, some of the other surplus obviously he keeps. And this is the process, right? So within this so what Marx will call this situation, all right, along with this term of alienated labor, he'll also come up with a term called exploitation. And it doesn't have any kind of Marx was very matter of fact about it. He was very much this was just a dry economic term for this process of exploitation, of skimming off the surplus labor value of the workers' efforts, and because he had the means of production, you know, so you know he could do whatever he wanted. He or she could do whatever he wanted with that. Here's the kicker, and here's the takeaway, and here's the thing that a lot of people fail to recognize, is that in all three of the major systems that we have talked about, in slavery, in feudalism, in capitalism, they all have one thing in common. Every system produces a surplus for the master, or the owner, or the nobleman. The nobleman always gets the bigger part of the share, and all the underlings get the lesser part of the share. And it's been like that through and it's true of capitalism too. And what Marx had to say about this is that Marx just kind of took a step back from the whole process and said that at the heart of this whole system of economics, of this distribution of products, is a conflict. It's a conflict that causes all kinds of bad feelings and having to renegotiate stuff and going on strike and, you know, mean bosses and abusive bosses and, you know, abusive to the point that we're seeing people like Harvey Weinstein or Cosby or whoever, taking real liberties with what they think they can do and what they can't do because they're the boss. And this has been normalized and naturalized for a very, very long period of time, right? Exploitation. What's it mean? I gave the definition here, even though I already gave the definition. Get the most profit out of your employees as the system will allow. You get the most that you pay them. It's like, in order for you to make the most profit as a successful business, you need to keep the wages down. You need to pay your employees just enough that you pay them what you can get away with, is basically what it comes down to. You pay them what you can get away with. You pay them the lowest amount that is acceptable, and this amount varies depending on your level of skills and what is required in the market. A brain surgeon working for a hospital is certainly going to get more than the guy making the mocha frappuccino mocha latte at wherever. I don't want to get into Starbucks, turn Starbucks into whipping boy. But in every situation, you will get the profit out you get the most profit out of your employees as the system will allow. Production of a surplus that other people get. This surplus, it's this maneuvering and this competition throughout society to gain the most surplus. If somebody else is making the same thing that you're making, you're competing with them. And you're trying to keep your prices low, and you're trying to keep your wages low with your workers so that you can put out something cheaper, or something better made. Either way, all right? So we got that, all right? Marx and both Debord will use a term. We have to understand some of these terms in order to understand what Debord is talking about. The first is this idea of this difference, and Debord will use this term a lot. We have to understand it. This difference between this idea of use value versus exchange value. What is this, all right? We call it the price. A lot of people bandy around this term called the price point now, but we'll get to that, right? The value of what? Commodities, all right? Commodities are what? Commodities are the things that we buy, we pay our money for. We work a job and we go and we buy commodities, whether it be necessary commodities like food or a boogie board, or a brand new pair of LeBrons, whatever it is commodities, right? Commodities, any single commodity for the most part has two different dimensions to it, all right? It has the use value. Say I take that orange over here. Say I take this orange, It's like its use value is that it, it's good for subsistence. You can eat it. You won't starve. You get a certain amount of vitamins out of it. It's healthy for you. That's its use value, all right? There's another value attached to this thing in the capitalist system, and that's called the exchange value, all right? What's a commodity? A thing that exists outside of us, all right? That we exchange for something else that we want or need, right? Remember in this collective system, when people were distributing goods based on what you needed, it's like use value was just that. It was like predicated on use value. Exchange value is something very different, all right? For instance, this PowerPoint uses the idea of like sneakers, right? Whatever sneaker they are. They protect your feet when walking. That's its use value. It's durability. It's like, and that's based on its durability. You need them, so that, your feet aren't just, terrible. Then comes this other aspect of the thing that is only made possible by way of capitalism, and it is called exchange value. Exchange value, as opposed to use value, is this. If use value is the value of something based on what its usefulness, an exchange value of something is predicated on what I can get. What I can get, what that commodity can fetch on the market, given the nature of things like scarcity and competition and all that. It's like, hence, it's like, you can go to Payless and pay like, $20 for a pair of sneakers. You can go wherever, and buy and pay. My nephew bought like $300 sneakers. The little bastard. It's like, that's same use value, different exchange value. Value of commodities. Well, something happens in all of this. There's a kind of shift in the collective psyche of people in capitalism when we get to a point where production is rampant. We're producing a lot of things, right? And what happens at a certain point in capitalism, especially in this, we were the poster boy for how this happened. You get to a point where where you have this huge infrastructure of factories and railways and ships and all this material, taking coal out of the earth and mines and getting the whole thing to run, right? You get to a point where everybody has the necessities, the things that we need that are based on use value, but all of that raw material, all those factories, all that production process, in order to keep operating and keep the owners making money, all right, after you got everything you need, they've got to do a couple of different things, right? One is this whole idea of pre-planned obsolescence. They've got to build, you can do one of two things in order to keep the ball rolling and stay in business. You can specifically make cheap-ass shit that is going to break, all right, so that in a year your sneakers or your tires, you got to get them swapped out. You're like once a year. You put a lot of mileage on them. You intentionally build something that's going to break down in a certain period of time, even though you would have the option of building something that would last longer. All right, or you need to create a desire in the people, in the public, for wanting things that they don't really need. And we talk all about that in Berger. In order for the system to exceed, and this is another, and this is a heavy term, this is another Marxist term, all right? Because what happens is what Marx calls the falling rate of profit. The falling rate of profit. That you get to a point in the manufacturing cycle, whatever the business is, where you might have like saturated every market that you could get, all right, or your thing goes out of style. Let's say that you're making something and it's a big fad. Capitalism has to do things to offset that falling rate of profit. So they have to innovate. They have to make things. They have to find new markets, foreign markets. They have to create new ways of making money, right? They got to create new ways of making money so that this exploitation can continue. What happens in this process of creating desires in people for things that they do not want, a strange psychological phenomena starts to occur in people in capitalist societies, and it has to do with commodities. And it has to do with this idea of commodity fetishism. How we start to fetishize And, what's a fetish? A fetish is a kind of inordinate desire for, if I have a compelling kind of overdetermined desire for something above and beyond what would be considered like normal. He'll call it commodity fetishism. And he'll say that this whole industrial process of creating desire and advertising and what John Berger called publicity will start to build this relationship between people and commodities. We've already been alienated from the things that we've made. We've already been, because here's the idea of like alienation of work, all right? For the longest period of time, when you work, for most of human history, let's say you were a cobbler, or let's say you were a bricklayer, or let's say you were a milliner, or you made bread, or you grew vegetables. There was this sense of personal value and identity that was psychologically therapeutic for the person to have a direct relationship to what they were making. If I was a cobbler, I made shoes, and there was a kind of homeopathic kind of balanced idea about me, about that my identity was derived by making shoes, and I would actually give a shit, about the bread I was baking and making sure that the people in the town, they loved my bread, and there was a sense that one's occupation was not alienating them, as opposed to going in and working at a fast food restaurant, or working at Target, or working at Walmart, or working on an assembly line, making something, and they give you a certain wage, and you can give a shit what, and it's like they've got to do all these different pep rallies and all these different psychological techniques to get the employees to actually care, and the people that they really get, the people that are like fertile ground to become like, well, I'm going to be employed. We have a word for them. We call them tools. We call them tools, right? The company man, that has absolute, but for the most part, people go into these shitty jobs and they leave their stuff there and they go home and they do what they have to do, and some of us, it's like, it's like rare is the person who loves working, especially under like when you're like just doing something you hate. And a lot of people are out there just doing shit that they hate, for most of their waking hours, and then on Fridays, they have this, you go to a bar from 6 to 7 o'clock, and what do they call that, folks? They call it happy hour. Why do they call it happy hour? Because it's called happy hour to remind you of how miserable the preceding 8 hours were. You wouldn't have to call it happy hour if all the hours preceding it were happy. Hence the term. Back to commodity fetishism. So we're alienated from our labor. All right? We're doing something that we don't really have any kind of personal, social, emotional investment in, and we may take some pride, but it's all kind of smoke and mirrors. This whole idea of commodity fetishism is when commodities start to take on this kind of animated life of their own. They have a character to them and an animus to them, and we become bewitched by them. We become hypnotized by fashion and getting a Mustang and buying the best and having the best like G8 or G9 or G10 or whatever the frickin' phone is, that we get into this weird area where we start to have these relationships with our commodities. we start to have these personal, emotional attachments to commodities, to things that are not people, right? And the advertising industries and and corporate capitalism lays out half of their money on creating that mirage of getting you more attached to your freaking G4 phone than to the person next to you. So he says a commodity, and this is straight from Marx, commodity fetishism. In the marketplace, the product of labor is displaced from the laborer. It's displaced. The value of the object is disconnected from the work that has gone into it. All right? You go and buy something. All right? Let's say you go to the Walmart and you buy, a new comforter and pillowcase that was made in Malaysia or is made in Thailand under abominable conditions, under the most deplorable conditions for no money, the people that were working there. You don't see that. You don't see all the exploitation. You don't see all the misery that was involved in getting, this pair of underpants to you for $2.99. All right? Because the work is invisible. We don't see it. Those people have been alienated from it. We're alienated from the process of exploitation that went into it. People are more in this kind of psychological milieu. People are more focused on the exchange of things than the relationships between people. Or as we like to say in certain circles, what's the expression? We have relationships with things and we use people. This whole idea of alienation, this whole idea of being alienated from one another, the whole idea of this feeling of being, and how social media seems to be exacerbating all that. And I think that the things that Debord is going to say about the spectacle are totally appropriate for our own age. All right? A commodity is therefore, and this is Marx, from pages 46 and 47 of Capital, which was his major 3-volume work. A commodity, he says, is a mysterious thing, simply because in it, the social character of men's labor that had been throughout history mostly social, the social character of men's labor appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of that labor. Because the relation of the producers to the sum total of their own labor is presented to them as a social relation, now we have what was supposed to be reserved for relationships between people, self-individuating, actualizing people with their feelings and their love and their hate. We've kind of misplaced that relationship and put it onto work. You ever notice, for instance, you go out with a bunch of co-workers, all right, on a Friday, everybody's beat up, and you go out, with your co-workers, and you go to a bar, you go have a few drinks, you go to somebody's house, have a few drinks. And what's the one thing that everybody wants to talk about more than anything? That's not to say that we don't talk about other things. Everyone wants to talk about the goddamn job. All right? It's like they take the job with them. They take the job home with them, and we talk about this in the other class. How the job infiltrates all of our... We're either working the job or we're resting up for the job. Where was I here? So the producers, the sum total of their own labor is presented. The object of my labor is given to me as a social relation. Now I have social relationships with commodities because they have this mysterious je ne sais quoi to them that has been foisted, and we got through this in Berger, chapter 4. The ways in which we have been bewitched by them. The ways in which and what is what is it based on? Envy is based on envy. So that there's always this kind of tension between people that are looking at each other in terms of, You know, you're looking at the one guy driving down the street with a Maserati, and you're just kind of like, you know, you're kind of jealous, and the guy driving the hoopty, you're kind of making fun of him. You know, that it's all this pecking order of stuff. Well, who's got this? I got this. You don't. You know, and it's just, and after everything is said and done, it's just really ugly, isn't it? So he says so labor is presented as existing not between themselves, but between the products of the labor. The relations connecting the labor of one individual with the rest appears not as a direct social relations between individuals at work, but as what they really are: material relations between persons, and social relations between things. And how this system, you know, and how we are with people, and how we are, for instance, with coworkers, especially in jobs, you know. And it doesn't even matter. It doesn't have to be like, you know, some like highfalutin brokerage firm in the middle of the Wall Street district where everybody's wearing Armani and trying to get a promotion, or in academia where people are like picking at each other to like try to get a promotion. It happens at Dunkin' Donuts, doesn't it? Happens at Dunkin' Donuts. People like bicker about each other, try to get each other fired, try to get, you know, you want to like play up to the boss, and it's just the whole thing, right? Marx's primary definition of the groups of individuals that take place in this system he calls by these highfalutin words, but I'll tell you what they mean in a minute: proletariat and the bourgeois. He makes this distinction between the people that own the means of production. This is the people with this. This is what we have now. This is what has now turned into the 1%. The 1% who have about that. There is a British think tank called Oxfam. All right, and every year Oxfam comes up with this report on the widening disparities between the smallest amount of the small number of people that have. I think now it's like for the top like 1%, the top 1% of the population of this planet, and they always come out like the Forbes 500, and most of them are American, but not all of them, right? But that top 1% has the same amount of capital, of liquidity, of money, than the bottom 67% of this planet. The bottom 67% of this planet is divvying up the same amount as this 1%. All right? Crazy? Crazy enough for you? So he called this the owner class, the owner of the means of production. He called them the bourgeois. The bourgeois. It's a French term, I believe. He called the working class the people that are working for other people, the people that are going and you know, working for a wage and giving up your time. He called them the proletariat. The proletariat, by the proletariat, he basically meant the working class. Now, there's something else that comes out, and we talk about this in the other class. Some of you who have been taking my other class understand, and here's where the Matrix comes back, folks. The Matrix always rearing its ugly head again. Marx used this term for the system of illusions that gets worked into the collective consciousness of the working class, of the proletariat. He said he called this way of not really kind of seeing what was really going on through this kind of trickery, right? Of convincing you that is very, very sophisticated, of convincing you that you're doing all right, it's the best of all possible worlds, and you should be happy you even got a job. Things like this. Things that we pass on from generation. It's like in my nuclear family, there was this big hang-up about whether you were working or not, whether you had a job. It's like, yeah, but he doesn't have a job. You gotta go find a job. God damn it! It's like, stop smoking pot and go find a job. It's like this obsession we have with the one's sense of inner value equated with having a job and what kind of job I have. All right, because you go to it's like most of this country at this point is so pathological that you go to a get together, you go to a thing, and you go to a bar, you go to a party, and friends have it, you go to Christmas. Everybody's like kind of hung up with what you do. Oh, he's a doctor. Oh, he's a computer programmer. Oh, he's a this whole. It's not about people anymore. It's about titles and insanity, fucking insanity. That we've come up with. And now the birds are coming home to roost in a lot of ways, because we're going to talk about in the next lecture. We're going to talk about. I want to end with this. What's false consciousness? False consciousness is this trickery that the power structure plays. He said, what Marx says is that social institutions like the mass media play a key role in ensuring that the working class remain happy with their situation, despite the inherent fairness of it all. Marx described the situation in which members of the subordinate classes, most of the people in the class, in our class and in the world in general, the subordinate class at this point, the situation in which the members of the subordinate class cannot see that they are being duped as false consciousness. It's the matrix. This consciousness that we operate under. In Marxist terms, ideology can ultimately be identified as the lies, the deceptions, and misinformation given to the working class in order to maintain their state of false consciousness. All right? Marx knew about this in the 1860s. When we get to Debord in the Society of the Spectacle now, he's going to get a lot more. He's going to do a more. Marx will never see mass media, right? He'll see the beginnings of photography and some film and newspapers and but he'll never see television. He'll never see radio for the most part. He'll never see the internet. And Debord will come up and say that the world that Marx came up in and all that stuff about false consciousness and exploitation and the ways this thing operates, commodity fetishism, under these new conditions of mass media, Guy Debord will say that this animal has gotten a lot more sophisticated and a lot more ferocious and a lot more cunning and a lot more baffling. And we're going to talk about it next time. I hope everybody is well. I hope you're taking care of yourselves. I think about you. I think about the distance. I hate this situation of having to do this like this, because I think that the things that I have to say in this class are far better communicated, in a living, breathing room with living, breathing people, where I can see, how you're thinking and you're reacting. But we'll just go with this for now. Keep reading Society of the Spectacle. Work on your papers. Call me if you need to. Let's get those done. Remember, Doug Lane, during the break. It's like I'm going to be putting stuff up during the break, all right? But I'm going to kind of play fast and loose with the 3-day rule, all right, since it's the break, all right? But I'm still going to be posting things so that we can catch up on stuff by the end of the week, by the time we get to Doug Lane. So take care of yourself, guys.